Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the original Intersex Connect Live. I'm coming here out of Las Vegas today where it's a beautiful, wonderful weather, 75 degrees. I'll be putting shorts on later. Anyway, I'm Joseph Benedict. I'm the host of the original Intersex Connect Live. And I want to give a big shout out to the producer, Bosch Bodie, because if there's anything about this show that looks anyway professional, it's Bosch's fault. And so I totally owe that to him. Um, so today we have an amazing guest. Um, I always like to bring advocates for the intersex people together and find out what they're thinking, what they're talking about, what people are listening to, and what people are not listening to. So today we have a special guest, Juli Owen, and she is the board chair and executive director of GENY, Gender Equality New York. She's working tirelessly to pass legislation for the gender equality of all people, as well as provide opportunities to connect and educate the public. She has an awesome Intersex 101 program that includes actual members of the intersex community and does so much amazing work. Anyway, I've been having like all sorts of technical problems today. I wrote everything down as quickly as I could, and that way we don't have to worry about problems like that. Anyway, I would like to bring Juli into the show. And Juli, thank you so much for joining our show. And I guess it should be Juli G-Owens if I want to be accurate. Yes?
Right.
So my apologies for shortcutting your name this morning. But anyway, we're not going to talk about the problems.
Thanks for
So
having me.
it's my pleasure. How are you doing today?
Terrific. We're actually having a warm spell here on Long Island. We're about 54 degrees and looking at
Cool.
possibly having a record for today. So woohoo!
Awesome. And then snow tomorrow. So
Snowed. It's actually snow tonight, so we're back to that again.
there you
Cold
go.
front is
So
coming through.
icy and cold and all that good stuff, huh?
Right. Right.
So Julie, you're an intersex advocate that happens to be transgender. So I don't really want to focus on the fact that you're transgender. I want to focus on your intersex advocacy. But I do think that you would have a unique perspective as to the differences between intersex and transgender and why it's important not to conflate the two. And I was wondering if you could speak on that for a moment.
Well, I'd be happy to. One of the things that we always do in our training is talk about what we call 4 characteristics that we all share, all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're cisgender, doesn't matter whether you're endosex, it doesn't matter whether you're trans, doesn't matter whether you're cisgender, it doesn't matter. And those 4 things are our biological sex, our gender identity, our gender expression, and our sexual orientation. And it's important for people to, first of all, understand that the difference between the intersex community and the transgender community, and again, I'm going to use the term transgender community being including non-binary people and so forth, so the big umbrella, if you will. I don't care for it, but we'll use it that way for now. The big difference is that, people who are intersex, their issues are biological, their biological sex, and
Right.
the natural variation, that they have as part of their characteristics. So that's different than gender identity issues, which is what my community basically, those are the characteristics or issues that we have. So the difference is that there may be intersex people who identify as transgender, but there are also intersex people who identify as cisgender.
Absolutely.
And, so it's really a completely different road, if you will. And we try to make that, when we do our trainings, we try to get people to understand about these 4 characteristics. And one of the big issues that we bring out, people, for identification purposes, people like to put things in boxes. They're easy, like, oh, well, we'll just put that in this box or just that in this box.
Yeah, we all need a label to identify what we are not. Is what
Yeah, exactly. So I usually start the training off by saying, before we start talking about people like me, let's talk about people like you. And I don't mean the intersex community. I'm talking about usually when I have a general population type
right,
audience, if you will.
right,
And I tell them right off the bat that most of them, statistically speaking, are probably cisgender. And usually the audience is like, their mouth opens up. It's like, what do you mean? I have a label? And it's like, yeah, you have a label. I have a label, wake up.
yeah. There you go.
And they're usually surprised. And I've even had some people, hasn't been recently, but in the past, where they'll go, well, don't call me cisgender. And I'm like, well, I'm calling you cisgender like as if I called you a human being. It's just it's a label that doesn't have any kind of negative connotation. It just means that, you identify with the sex designation that you were given at birth.
I always feel that the people that have problems with the word cisgender, the people that use transgender as a slur and try to belittle people with that. So cisgender must be a slur, and that's the way they feel because that's the way they use those words.
Right, exactly. But, again, assuming that most of the people in our audience, when they're there for training, they're there because they want to learn. They're there because they want to be more comfortable around, trans, non-binary, and intersex people. So, we're already starting with a good group to begin with usually. Now, there are occasions where I've had someone, it was hilarious. I did a training at a primary school, and one of the teachers went off on his, Jesus deal, whatever we want to call that. And no, there's only men and there's only women. Well, I hate to tell you, but there's a whole community of people. Well, that's a very small community. Well, but they exist. So your box system, of a box for male people and a box for female people, if you're going to use boxes, you have to add a third box. But we get away from the boxes altogether, and we talk about continuums or spectrums. And by that, I mean, usually we represent it by a line that's going in both directions, east and west, if you will.
Right.
With the understanding that in these four characteristics, whether it's your biological sex, whether it's your gender identity, whether it's your gender expression, or whether it's your sexual orientation, these lines are, there's an infinite number of points within these continuums or lines. And that means that there's a point for you and there's a point for me in each one of these characteristics. So it's
absolutely
not of you having the wrong, you being in the wrong place or this or that. It just means that on this continuum, there's a point for you and a point for me. And there's no right, there's no wrong. There's just what it is.
Exactly. I like the way you explain that.
So that's kind of how we deal with, those questions.
Yeah, that's great. So anytime I talk to an intersex advocate, I always have to ask the same question, only because I took a very long road to learn just the word intersex. After learning that I was intersex, it was like another 5 years before I actually even knew the word. And I call that intersex island for an intersex person, the time between realizing that you're intersex and realizing you're not the only one. Mm-hmm. So I always want to ask, how did you learn about intersex in the first place?
That's great. For me, to be perfectly honest with you, and I'm interested by what you were talking about, realizing that there were other people that were intersex. Mm-hmm. I grew up in northwestern New Jersey, which is very much a country, farming area in mm-hmm. New Jersey. And as a result, there was limited information. And I also grew up basically during the 60s, which meant that there wasn't a lot of information in regard to my community. Right. And so it was a real problem. For a long period of time, I felt that, I was God's mistake, that right. somehow, because I didn't see anybody like me. Mm-hmm. So it was really hard. And then as I got older, and actually into my adult years, and I started going to transgender events, and I'd look around the room and I'd see like 300 people in in some kind of like awards dinner or something like that at some of these events. And I was like, well, if I'm God's mistake, then God has a serious problem with quality control, because there's a whole bunch of us, But as I started, learning about how to talk about my community, the idea or the issues of the intersex community kept coming up. And we started doing advocacy work. We started getting trans advocates around Long Island. There was a period of time when we did not have our civil rights here in New York State. We didn't get our civil rights until actually 2019.
Right.
So we were legally, people could legally discriminate against us in employment, housing, and public services. So
was the trans panic effect still a thing?
They called everything the bathroom bill. So it was all about, well, if you pass this law and give civil rights to transgender people, then evil cisgender people are going to go into the ladies' room and attack women and children. If it's not already the trans women in, the men in dresses that are always going to be there and attack you as well. And there was always this famous, I don't know if it was a video or an ad, basically saying this, and you could see the two stalls, and one set of stalls you could see some pretty little girls, like girly shoes at the bottom, little girl. And then next to it was these big, dirty, ugly work boots that there was some kind of like pedophile or pervert in the ladies' room next to that poor little girl with those cute shoes. That's the kind of crap that we had to fight against, to get our civil rights. So it took us a while to do that. But what happened was that as we started doing advocating work, some members of the transgender community also identify as intersex. And they became important advocates and people who I consider friends, actually. And as I learned more about them and some of the issues that they had, we started saying, well, wait a minute, who's helping get this information out? And really it was limited, unfortunately. And so initially I was told by some people that I consider mentors, do not get into the intersex, do not get into the issues about the intersex community. You're not a member of that community. You shouldn't be talking about it. Okay. So we went like that for maybe the first year or so, but it became very apparent that people just didn't know enough about the intersex community. And it's important to get that information out. So we, with the people that are intersex, helped us put together not only the presentation that we use and the format that we use in our forums, but helped me put together slides that had information coming directly from the intersex community. Obviously, I've done some work, doing internet, going out and Googling and trying to learn all the various things that need to be done. I follow Interact. There's a number of groups that are, doing work that I try to follow and make sure that we stay up with. But what ended up happening is that we now, in every setting, have at least one or two slides where we specifically talk about the issues that the intersex community faces. I can tell you that we are now doing training with police departments in upstate New York. I just finished one this past week up in a little village called Fallsburg. And we basically trained their whole police department, which was basically about 20 people in total. But
were they all friendly and open-minded, or
they were open?
Okay.
I'm not sure how accepting.
Yeah, gender justice does classes like that here, and sometimes we get some pushback. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, well, what it was they were respectful in the respect that they sort of, I think if something bothered them, they just sort of looked down. And they didn't argue. They didn't bring you well, that's crap, anything along that line. It wasn't like that at all. But whatever. But for them, we made sure that they understood about the intersex community, because that's a part of our basically our base, what I call Gender 101 training. Because we go into the fact that, and I think it's a perfect beginning, is to start getting people to open up this idea of this spectrum or continuum and get away from boxes. And biological sex is the beginning point of anything. There's more than you think.
Right. Absolutely. There's way more than most people think. And when I started looking into it, I got surprised. And the only thing I know absolutely is that I absolutely don't know it all, and I absolutely never will, because it's huge. It's way beyond X, Y, and XX, and
Hmm.
that's like barely even a starting point on the whole thing. So, but before we go too deep into another subject, you do legislative work and try and get bills passed. There was a bill in New York City in 2019,
Yep.
and I was wondering, pass, fail, if not passed, is it still alive?
It
And
is not only alive, but it was passed. However, it was an education bill. Um,
okay,
and it's basically asking their Department of Health to make sure that there are information sheets, access perhaps to groups that can give peer counseling, which I think
right,
is always important to make sure that people are aware of. We currently are doing a similar bill in New York State. We've just gotten the language put together in the Assembly. Now, we still have to get a similar bill in the Senate. And then once those two bills match up, hopefully we'll be able to push it out for a vote. The issue is that it's not really getting to the heart of the problem. Both of these pieces of legislation, the New York City piece that was passed, as well as what we're trying to do here in New York State, these are education bills. Um, it was decided that we should take a step at a time and try and first of all get this on people's radar, get people to start talking about it, get people to start understanding
that's important.
what it is, and hopefully when we have meetings, bring community members in where they can talk specifically about some of the things that they face and the importance of making other people aware of this community. So that's really where we're at. Now, we believe that once we get those education bills passed, the next step will be to then talk about non-consensual surgeries on intersex children and babies. Um,
The I did a little bit of work, a couple of years anyway, trying to do non-consensual surgeries on children legislation, and you're going to run into a few problems there. A, there's never been a single surgery banned in the United States,
mhm.
including lobotomy, and the Kennedys tried to get lobotomy stopped. Um, so to be able to ban a surgery is not probably ever going to happen. But I applaud your efforts, and um, just look out for the phrase of the for the mental health of the parents, because that's the exclusion that the Society of Pediatric Urology keeps putting in everything, which kind of makes it not matter. So
Well, I think there's another point to this. I think people should have a choice, but what we're
yes,
looking to do is delay the surgery. I
yes,
mean, if someone wants, if someone is an adult and they want this cosmetic surgery,
yeah,
non-emergency type surgery, then
absolutely,
they should have it.
yep,
We don't
yep,
want to stop. So we're not looking to ban the surgery.
right,
We're looking to delay the surgery until the person whose body it is
can
can
consent.
make a determination as to what they want.
Yes, my body, my choice, and all that.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So, but I love the education part, because um, my focus for the last year or so now has been the normalization of intersex people around the world. Because I think a lot of these parents that are doing the surgeries are doing it because of the way the transgender community is treated. And they are afraid that their child will be treated the same way that transgender people are being treated. And so they have these normalization surgeries. And I always like to point out the where transgender and intersex do crossroads for sure is 8 million children have been surgically assigned sex without their knowledge or consent in the world today. And you were talking about the spectrum and all the different points and all different ways it can go, but they always go with XX or XY. You either have to be one or the other. and not doing surgery doesn't come up as one of the options. But if you consider not doing surgery one of the options, they have a 33% of getting the sex and gender correct on the child and a 66% chance of getting it wrong. So my problem is that mathematically speaking, already created 5 million transgender or gender non-conforming children through surgery that they never requested, and then they're passing laws to ban them from using restrooms and activities like sport. And so there's a definite crossover between the two. So I think the education part that you're working on is crucial in normalizing intersex surgery so that the parents aren't so scared of how their children will be treated if they don't do the surgeries.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think that we have to keep working on is normalizing our communities. And by that, I mean, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal for your child to be trans. It's not a big deal for your child to be intersex.
No,
one of the things that we try to put out is to make people aware of the fact that without having surgery, many intersex people live very healthy and happy lives.
Yes.
Their bodies work a little differently. That's what it is. Don't worry about it. But what I think is missing is the opportunity for a family, for example, that because I'm a parent. My child is grown now, but I'm a parent, and I know the drive to want your child to have the perfect life, to try to make sure that they never have to go through all kinds of things that maybe you had to go through. I mean, it seems to be, I think, something that most parents feel.
Yeah, so, it's something you shoot for, but it's unrealistic.
Oh, so. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. But the point is, like, that's your mission. You're going to be the best parent in the world, and you want your kid to be perfect, and, the whole deal. Well, the reality is that, as you said, it doesn't work out that way. And what we have to allow for is that there is a natural biological variation in this world, and we have to assume that, it's there and it's real.
Yes, and quit scaring people into the boxes so that they can't figure out where on the spectrum they actually belong. Because everybody's like, well, you should know how you feel and where you fit and all this automatically because that's how you feel and how you fit. And it's like, well, the only thing I have to compare it to is the A and the B that I've been taught my entire life. And now you're saying, well, you need to find your spot between A and B and be comfortable with it. And it's like, but maybe I need some time to figure it out, because when I first found out I was intersex, and I didn't say a word about it, but 5 years later, when I started looking into it and I thought I needed to be a female, it was fairly strong that I should be more feminine than I had been, but being a female for a year or two, it was pretty strong that I was not a female. And so that I was both a combination of the two. And I've got some feminine qualities, but I'm also a jerk. So I fit in the man category as well. Oh, whoops, sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. But so yeah, anyway, that is just so confusing and all that when somebody is trying to figure out where they belong on the spectrum, and everybody's like saying, well, you need to pick a spot now, or you either have A or B, and you're like, well, those definitely don't fit. And some of these other things don't fit. And I just wish it was less important and it was just human, and we didn't have gender. And if we could get rid of gender being part of the subject, like it matters, that would help, because gender is like out of control right now because it's not going to fit in a box, any box. Because, like you said, somewhere along the spectrum, there's a dot for you, and there's what, millions of dots.
Mm-hmm.
If you go by intersex, there's at least 47. Um, and that's just with the science we know from 1998, and we haven't updated, so it's probably way more than that.
Well, we keep learning more and more about it. It's not so much gender as much as it's the gender binary.
Yeah.
Because the gender binary is this whole thing where, at least in our society, we've broken it out to there can only be males and there can only be females. Males are supposed to be masculine, females are supposed to be feminine, and we do a whole thing on what we call gender conforming. And we take, two normal pictures of like one of the pictures is like three guys, looking very serious. They've got their suit and ties on and they're looking very serious. And I always joke about it. It's like, well, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but you can tell that they're making an important decision, and that we know that men make important decisions. And I said it could be, where they're going to go get a beer, but we know that men make decisions. And then the second picture that we show is a group of women, politely clapping. It looks like maybe somebody, maybe they raised, X amount of dollars at the bake sale or something. And they're all, they're just clapping, very politely. And again, I say, well, how do I know these are women? Well, I can tell by their hairstyles, I can tell by their clothing, and I can tell that, they're politely clapping because, we expect women to be supportive and, just like that type of thing. And I said, now the real world is that we know that there are women that can be great leaders. And we know that there are men who can be supportive and kind and, be warm, that type of thing.
Yes.
And we have to recognize that. But as you'll remember, when we were probably kids, because I think we're close in age, male nurses, there were no male nurses.
No.
There were no female police officers.
No.
Now, when I go into a police academy, it's not a high number, but I will see 5 to 10 women in that class. And I can tell you now when I go to the hospitals, when I do trainings at the hospitals, there's a whole lot of male nurses there now. And that's the way it should be.
Absolutely.
We all have capabilities and qualities that should be used in a positive way with our society. But we have to get away from this idea. Well, that's women's work, or I don't want you to be a male nurse. Why don't you be a doctor?
That kind of comes to the women always would like to have a man at home that would help do the dishes and the cooking and the cleaning, but they refuse to teach their child how to cook and clean because it's girls' work, not boys' work.
Right on
So
target.
how do you expect to change this if you won't even teach your own kid how to cook? I mean, really.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
And it shouldn't be a bad thing to teach a little boy how to cook. My son's an awesome cook. So.
And my daughter is not a good cook at all.
No. Well, I was a chef for 35 years, so he picked up a couple of things along the way. So anyway, now that I've totally diverted our conversation again, I do that really well. You've been an advocate for a couple of decades, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about your Intersex 101 class. More so the people that you're including, the intersex people. I think one of them is scheduled to be a guest real soon. But you're actually brought these people in and had conversations with them and have them have conversations with the group, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and could you drop some names for us as the intersex, because I know their names and all, but
well, I'm happy to do it. I don't know whether, my question is this: would this be a case of outing? That's the only concern that I have.
No, because at least the first 4 anyway are on Facebook and part of this group, I believe. And I know at least 3 of them are part of this group. And if they're out doing intersex education programs, then they're pretty much out, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Well, two I would go right off the bat that have had probably the biggest impact on me is John Schindler and Jim Costi.
Yeah.
Those two have, John to begin with, John here on Long Island has always been an amazing advocate for the intersex community here on Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
He's intelligent, reasoned. When you listen to his story, there's no way that you cannot feel, your heart go out to him.
Right.
And he has an amazing positive attitude. And is just really, really a very nice person that from Long Island really started me on this path, to be perfectly honest with you. And the second person that really accelerated my knowledge was Jim Costi.
He's got a lot of writings on Facebook, and he's posted them in this group. If you haven't scrolled through, you'll find some of his writings. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anyway, but he took me to another level. And in both cases, they've both done work with us as far as, being part of our forums and so forth. But more importantly, they've had a big impact on what we train with, the information that we give to others out in the world, right. Thing. So I just, they're the two that really have had the biggest impact on me.
Right.
And in their way, they have mentored me in the work that I do in trying to support the intersex community. Without their input, without their help, I don't think I'd be anywhere where we should be. But I do feel very comfortable with the work that we do because of them. So those two would jump off at me right away.
Right. I love your attitude there because it's kind of like I've served on a couple of boards, and if you're on a board that doesn't have any of the people that you're trying to help on the board, then you're not really doing anything. So for you to have intersex people helping you educate yourself about intersex is like groundbreaking for a lot of people.
Well, we're also very lucky to have a board member of ours that is intersex. They are not as fully out as like Jim and John are, but they certainly recognize it. I think they identify more as trans. However, they are a part of the community. And Absolutely. So when we do training, we're training for them as well.
Yep. So, but I love your training classes. I love that you include intersex people in your classes. But you've been doing intersex advocacy for like 20 plus years anyway, right?
Well, I wouldn't say the intersex part. No, I would say that that's probably been the last maybe 6 to 8 years.
Okay, so 20 years of trying to do gender equality.
Exactly. Excuse me.
So, and I'm wondering, during your 2 decades of activism, if there's something that you felt really, really did work and you would like to repeat it and maybe share it with other people so that they could use it, or if there's anything you found that was really problematic and you want to help other intersex advocates avoid going there.
I guess we've been very lucky because first of all, well, we hung out with the right people to start with. I mean, that really helps. If you have the right people who are strong advocates for the community and want to make sure that if you want to do a good job, they're willing to help you do a good job. So we were very lucky in that respect. But I think the most important thing that we all have to do is get information out regarding the intersex community. I can't tell you, I was one of the biggest things that I was surprised about was that when I did healthcare training, and I had this like kind of like question mark within the training I actually do, which is, and it's specifically talking about the biological sex characteristic. And I go through the whole, biological sex is this, this, and this. It's not to be, confused with the sex designation, because that's something completely different.
Yeah.
Sex, what's on your driver's license, simply is the baby was born, they open the legs, they took a quick look, they yell out, it's a boy or it's a girl in most cases. And, that's it. There's no further, study into the baby's body. There's no, hormones or genetic check. It's just, yep, you got the right equipment. Now you get a designation. And
Yes,
so
you get a box.
yeah, exactly right. You get a box, and a color. You get pink or blue. Get that right away. But then the last thing on that slide is, so there's only two biological sexes, right? And I was shocked at healthcare facilities where 99.9% of the people in the audience went, yep, there's only males and females. Yep.
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, this is healthcare people.
That one.
So that it's one thing if you go to the police department and they fall for that. I mean, because okay, they don't get it. But healthcare?
Yeah. You think that would be
shocking.
important.
And so one of the trainings that I'm looking forward to that we're going to be doing in March is someone from the New York State Department of Health, specifically the AIDS Institute, happened to come to one of the forums that we did. And they were like, oh my God, we don't know anything about intersex. And this is a really great training. And we want you to train our people. So, we're going to be working through New York State Department of Health, the AIDS Institute, to help them understand intersex people. But, that's a great starting and a good step forward. But it's shocking to know that most healthcare workers are not aware of the fact that you can't just drop a baby into one of two boxes. Like, really? You don't know that?
Yes. None of them do.
Right. It's shocking. I mean, these are people who are supposed to be experts in taking care of our bodies.
Yes. Like even the endocrinologists don't know.
Mm.
And, I've been educating doctors all over because I move all the time. Every time I update my driver's license, I have to move. Anyway, but so I've educated like tons of doctors, and some of them are open-minded and willing to accept new information. Others are like, well, I got my medical degree that said I already knew everything I needed to know, so I don't need to learn anything else. So yes, it's the medical community absolutely positively needs to come on board and educate themselves, or at least find a way to get educated about the existence of more than XX and XY.
I think one of the things that has to be done, and I don't know whether we can do it legislatively or not, but to ensure that, for example, here in New York State, any school that has a medical school has to have some specific training that includes, intersex people, transgender people, non-binary people. We get that information out because even with trans health, there are a lot of issues in regard to hormones and things of that nature that a lot of doctors don't have any basics on it. No. And if they are given any kind of training, it's usually an LGBTQ training, given by usually a white cisgender male. So it's like, okay.
Absolutely.
But he's gay. Okay. That doesn't mean you know anything at all about trans people or intersex people.
Yes. We definitely need to get the trainings in the schools. I talked to Touro University earlier this week and invited them to maybe specialize in being intersex doctors, because there is no such thing. And I think it should be against the law to surgically alter a intersex child and provide zero palliative care for mental health or physical health in any way, shape, or form for the rest of their lives. And I think that should be a crime. And if we can get legislation that says you cannot surgically alter these people unless you have an intersex specialist that can help them through the rest of their life, then they're going to come up with specialists real quick, because they're not going to stop doing the surgeries.
Well, I hope that we can stop. What I want to do, what I think is important to do, is delay the surgery. If an adult decides that they want the surgery, have at it.
Absolutely.
But if you are going to delay the surgery, then you have to not only help that person, but as we talked about earlier, you've got a set of parents that need
Yes.
help and need support. They need to have
Mental health care would be
mental
really
health care,
nice.
but they also need access to peer counseling. In other
Hmm.
words, I think it's really important for an intersex adult to be able to talk to a set of parents when that child is now found to be intersex.
Yes,
Be able to
absolutely.
say,
Because I'm imagining the parents being on Intersex Island as well at the moment.
yeah, exactly. Well, we always talk, in the trans community, we always talk about the parents going through the journey as well as the child going through the journey. So it's the
Right.
same thing.
Yeah,
The families, if they're supportive, the families are going through a journey as well.
absolutely. But yes, if they could get um, mental health care and um, physical care for their child throughout their lives and be able to take care of them and help them navigate the world that is just learning how to accept them, um, it would be a lot more healthy for the children and the parents as well, because the parents are going through a lot. And, I, like my parents, I forgiven them for doing the surgeries in the first place because of where the world was and how they had to make their decisions and everything. But I'm unable to forgive them for lying to me about it my entire life.
Mm.
And literally, right till the time they died, they lied about it. And so that's a little hard to forgive. But so I think that even I went through the surgery that my parents should have had more instruction or help or support to be able to deal with this child that in third grade decided their favorite color was pink, and you'd surgically assign them boy and how to reconcile those things without beating the crap out of them. I think it would have been really helpful.
Unfortunately, that was a different world. And those of us who have lived through that garbage, you
Mm.
know, I think it's our job to try to make sure that kids, whatever we can do to help the next generation coming up, doesn't have to go through that same kind of stuff, and that
Yeah.
parents have some support, and that there's education out there, and that we get the people in charge aware of what's happening.
Yes. Then it seems so weird that they are not aware of what's happening. Um, It's like you talk to the politicians and people like this that even though the what was it, four former U.S. Surgeon Generals put out the Palm Center report rethinking intersex surgeries, the United Nations put out a
Mhm.
report saying intersex surgery is torture, and none of them have any idea what the heck they're talking about. It's like, what? What's that? Oh yeah, I
Well,
saw the report, but I have no idea.
I have to tell you, we do a lot of work with legislators, and their staff are usually the people who know more about the actual legislation and the things that are going on. They're really sort of the face, but there's a
Yes,
whole lot of people behind them, and you really have to get to the staff and educate the staff so that they can educate the politician. That's
right.
really that's really what it's all about.
Yes. So I guess we need to start doing presentations in political studies somehow
Well, I
so that
think
we
that it would be a great idea to have proper education in high schools. How about we do proper
there is
education in high
that.
schools and middle schools and that type of thing.
Ah,
And again, age appropriate. But
right.
I think everybody should understand that life on Earth, there's a lot of biological variation. There's a
Yes.
lot, you know. And
Yes. I think if a child is old enough to tell the difference between a boy and a girl because a boy has this and a girl has that, that they're also old enough to understand that there are other options. And
absolutely right.
I don't care if that's 3 years old or whatever for that child. If they're like kindergarten cop, the little boy says in the middle of the class, boys have this, girls have that, and if they're able to understand that, they should be able to understand that that's not all there is.
Exactly. And probably they'll accept it easier at a very young age.
Yes.
It'll be a part of their foundational knowledge so that you just build upon it. Then as they get older, they'll know more and more and more.
Yes, and they won't feel like they got tricked somewhere along the line.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's kind of like, what do you mean Santa Claus doesn't exist? Oh, no. All right. Let's see. Where are we at? Oh, so the transgender and the intersex communities are a little bit divided, and the intersex community is divided within itself, and the transgender community is divided within itself. Um, and I was wondering, what of the intersex transgender divide have you seen? And do you think that there's a way that we can heal it so that we all come together and start fighting for human rights for all instead of just human rights for me?
I would say that starting right off the bat, the trans community is not knowledgeable about the intersex community. So that's probably our biggest issue.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why we like doing these trainings. We always have community members show up at these trainings. I don't know that, I think they just feel good about it. They get an opportunity to see how the training is going. They get to hear how cisgender people have questions or whatever. And there may be pieces of information that they actually get as well. So with that being said, the thing is that if our community understood the issue of intersex people better, I think that we could definitely give more support and better support to them. But we're still faced with, like, when you talk about like the trans community being split, I've heard, trans activists talk about those damn non-binary people,
Yeah.
it's like, So we've started using gender expansive people. So that because really most trans people are binary in their gender.
Mm-hmm.
Most trans people, there are probably some others, but most trans people are like, oh, I'm a trans woman. Oh, I'm a trans man,
Right.
which is binary.
Right.
And the non-binary community faces different issues.
Yes, but if you're non-binary, you're still admitting that there's a binary.
Right.
So
yeah, and if you're
I don't claim a gender because I don't believe there is a binary. And the only way to claim a gender is to assign yourself within the binary. And so, yes, I'm not even non-binary. I just don't have gender.
And that's cool too. I mean, that again means that you have a point somewhere on the line with your gender identity. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It makes it who you are. And that's as simple as that.
Yeah. We have a comment here from Facebook user with no name that they need intersex rights in Canada as well. And yes, they do. I put a post on the Facebook Intersex Connect, the original Intersex Connect Facebook, specifically speaking about the number of intersex surgeries that have happened since 2015. I don't want to repeat. I want to say it's 5 million, but I don't think that's accurate. So I'm going to leave it there. And we also have another comment that says, been in programs that stuff be sexually harassment of me, and they don't want to understand. I'm not sure which programs they're referring to as far as that goes, but there's a sexualization of the intersex community that is like out of control. I'm admin on another intersex group, and it is amazing how many people we have to block because they try and come into the group for wanting to date intersex people because it's on their checklist of conquering sexes and whatnot. And so, yes, there is a whole lot of sexual harassment of intersex people, which is why not a lot of intersex people are willing to say that they are publicly.
Right. Well, we
So,
see that in the trans community as well. I mean, we're always being sexualized, if you will.
yes, the chasers.
Yeah,
That's what I call them,
exactly,
the chasers.
exactly,
And there's
exactly.
so many of them. Uh, but hopefully one day we will all come together and fight for human rights so that everybody can be treated equally, regardless of anything. They're a human being. They should be treated just as well as any other human being. Someday, I hope that that will happen. I hope I live long enough to see it happen, but I don't know if I can live that long. It's going to hurt. It already does. Oh.
Right. Well, I would suggest to you that what we should do is we should look at the progress that we make, and that has to be good enough. You know, we have to feel good about that because those are those battles that we're winning. So, you know,
Yes.
just a little 20-person police department in upstate New York, 20 of those people heard about intersex people.
Yes, and you know they went home and went, "Did you hear this? You got to hear about
Exactly.
this." So
Right.
yeah,
Maybe one
40
of them,
people.
maybe one or two of them actually Googled it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yep.
and
Planting
that's
seeds. That's what I call it.
right. And so when we do trainings, we do a lot of trainings with like Unitarian Universalist churches, you know, congregations
Mm-hmm.
and things. And we always laugh about it, you know, sort of kiddingly about, you know, these little old ladies come and they listen, but they then maybe go to their knitting group and go, you won't believe what I just did on Sunday afternoon after service. They had this whole program on, you know, trans and non-binary and intersex people. Oh my God, you know, that type of thing. And then
Right.
it's like that pebble in the pond that just keeps getting bigger.
There you go. Gotta love it. So, Julie, it's been a wonderful show, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit and start talking about you
Okay.
because the other day when we were having a conversation, um, it came up that you are the father of a child,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I don't talk about my son much because he doesn't have a problem with it. He just doesn't want to be famous because his dad's intersex. Um, but your child is a female, is that correct?
Correct. An adult daughter.
Okay. And she calls you father, yes? Or dad?
Dad.
Yep. And I thought
In
the
public,
reason,
she calls me Julie.
right. Okay. I found that interesting because I have the same relationship with my son, whereas um, he spent 20 plus years knowing me and calling me dad. And I don't expect him to change that because it's deeply ingrained in him. And I will always be his dad, regardless of what clothes I'm wearing. And so I thought it was interesting that you pretty much have the same attitude with your
Yes,
daughter.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel the exact same way. It's interesting when you say that I will always be his dad is your comment. And that's how I
Mhm.
feel about, you know, my daughter. I will always be her dad.
Right.
And I provided, again, you know, specific duties as a dad. You know, I
Right.
coached all of her teams. Um, you know, I certainly, if she fell and I picked her up and hugged her, I certainly did that. I mean, it wasn't that go to your mother. I didn't do that.
Right.
But I was probably, you know, I can tell you that I was the one that made sure that the training wheels came off the bike.
Right.
Mom was like, "Oh, she's not ready,"
Right.
and my daughter was like, "Oh, I'm so afraid," and I was like,
Mm.
"It's time. You need to take the training wheels off. Let's go."
There you
And
go.
I was the one that pushed that. And guess what? I mean, to this day, she rides without training wheels, you know, that type
Hey, imagine that.
and even today, you know, she has a management job in a hospital. She's amazing, and I'm so proud of her. But in that situation, I mean, I'll get a call from her and say, "Hey, I got a problem. What would you do in this case?" And we'll talk about it. I mean, I've got 40 years of management experience, so I'll throw some ideas. I never expect her to do them exactly the way I would, but what
Right.
I usually do sparks some ideas in her head as to how she wants to do it.
Right.
And she'll do it her way, which will be obviously much more successful than if she were trying to do it my way.
Yes,
But
generally.
the ideas of, like, you know, taking the bull by the horn or requiring people to live up to certain standards, um, you can translate however you want that to be, but those are good rules to have if you're trying to manage people.
Right. All right. So now, because we're running out of time, I would like you to tell me about GENY New York, if you could.
Well,
Or,
we're very proud of Gender Equality New York. We are a 501c3, means that we're a nonprofit here in New York State. We actually started out back in probably 2005, I believe it was, here on Long Island locally, and we just loosely organized by an organization called Long Island Transgender Advocacy Coalition, LITAC, LITAC. But we found that it was very limiting because the work that we had to do was really not based on Long Island, it was based statewide.
right.
And we also realized that if you take a look at New York State, it's a big state. And there are a couple of big cities, Syracuse, Albany, and Buffalo up north. Of course, New York City, which is like the, ground zero of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there are differences with upstate and downstate. There's differences with Long Island and New York City. There's differences between Buffalo and Long Island.
Right.
And we realized that our community members had different needs across the state. So we decided that we would start, go forward in trying to build a statewide advocacy organization for transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. And it all happened at about the same time when the New York State LGBT Advocacy Organization, which was known as Empire State Pride Agenda, literally closed their doors before the trans community got our civil rights. Once marriage equality passed, all the people that were sending them money to keep the organization going left because it was all gay money.
Right.
And once the gay money left, they shut it down, and they left us defenseless. And so at that point in time, we decided that we moved forward. And so we incorporated as of 2018, got our 501c3, I think the following year, designation from IRS. And we are, growing and trying to do all kinds of good things.
There you go. And the website for GENY is
genderequalityny.org.
genderequalityny.org. And it shows up on the screen there. Also, if somebody is interested in having you come do a Intersex 101 for them, how would they get a hold of you so that they could do that?
The best way would be just simply to email me. The email address that I have, there you go, is juliowens1@aol.com. There's no E in Julie. It's JuliOwens1@aol.com. And we'd love to hear from you and love to see how we might be able to support, what your needs are, because I think it's a real positive thing that we can accomplish.
That's awesome. Well, Julie, we have a little over a minute left. And I just want to say thank you so much. You were a wealth of information and a great guest. A guest like you makes it so easy for me to do my part. And I can't thank you enough for being part of this. I can't thank you enough for being an intersex advocate and everything that you're doing to help educate the world and help normalize intersex people around the world.
Well, thank you for having me and keep up the wonderful work that you're doing because, all of us pushing, maybe we can get something accomplished.
There you go. If we can get all 130 million voices going at one time of all the intersex people in the world, we would be very, very loud and they would definitely hear us. So anyway, is there anything that you wanted to say before we go?
No, just thank you for having me. It was really a lot of fun to be here. I looked forward to it, and just happy to see the work being done that we're trying to accomplish.
Well, great. Hey, thank you so much for being a guest of the show today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I really do. And thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. And when I come out, I'll come out and visit you.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, Bosch, roll those credits.